with its big, throbbing library chock full of—
Why is it throbbing? Hello everybody, my name is Sora, and today we're reacting to truly evil human experiments that actually happened. All that I ask is please never experiment on me. It probably will hurt. If you want me to watch any other videos, make sure you comment them below, and let's get started.
Evil human experiments.
Evil ones.
Alright fellas, let's start things off a little easy. Back in the 4th century BC, Greek civilization was reaching new heights. People were getting more and more curious about the world around us and began
discover a lot of
asking really
things.
important questions. What does
Like
that
what?
do? How does that work?
Did
I leave the oven on?
Soup or salad?
Is this real life? Or is this just
Where's my
Spanish?
dad?
Will this fry the rice or not? All pretty valid questions for people
shrimps
just
fry
wishing to learn the
rice?
workings of the natural world. While many focus on the mechanics of the universe, others chose to focus on the inner workings of humans themselves. And not only from a philosophical standpoint. Sometimes you just want to know what makes us tick.
Why is he looking at that grip like that? Is he being freaky
That's what
about
Greek
it?
physician Herophilus wanted to find out and
Herophilus.
document in detail. After getting his education at the Hippocratean medical school in Greece, Herophilus turned his bulging eyes towards the city of Alexandria, Egypt, with its big, throbbing library chock full of—
Why is it throbbing? Libraries do not throb.
scrolls just begging to be read. Time to go to Egypt, he said. And so he did. Doot, doot, doot. After getting himself established and taking on a student, a young physician named Erasistratus, they got to work. Together, the two men would begin to carve out a new branch of science, anatomy. But in order to do so, you need some bodies to cut open to start slopping their guts around. And what better way to obtain fresh bodies than to use condemned criminals, captured and supplied by the Alexandrian rulers.
So messed
Little
up.
Hero and Era were like kids in a candy store with a hopeful glimmer in their eyes, excited to begin their wondrous experiments.
No!
But surely the criminals put under
so
the knife were
sad.
already past their expiration date, right?
No.
Nope.
my
Instead, Hero
God!
and Era performed live human dissections, called vivisections, to broaden their understanding of the human body.
So messed up.
They even went as far as to perform these surgeries in full view of the
What?
public.
In the middle of the square? Imagine you're walking through the city, you want to go get some food, you want to go to McDonald's, and they're doing this in the middle of the place, bro.
For anyone who thought it would be cool
Where's there an
and
airplane?
interesting. Wow, that's both cool and interesting.
And
That's what I'm
disgusting.
saying. Herophilus documented their findings in extreme detail, making breakthrough discoveries of the human anatomy. In doing so, he inflicted unimaginable suffering to his subjects.
Literally, that would
Since
hurt.
anesthetics weren't really a thing back then, the victims felt every cut and slice, at least until they passed out from the pain or died of blood loss.
Ow.
Dissecting intestines, reproductive organs, eyes, or even purposefully damaging the motor nerves to inflict
Ew.
paralysis. It was basically a big game of, what does this button do?
That's so messed up, bro. Imagine you're one of the poor people that have to go through this. Imagine they cut your pee-pee off. And it's just like, what happens? Bruh, I would be so sad. That's so sad.
In the end,
He pooped
Hero
himself.
and Era's findings over 40 years of vivisections were revolutionary for the medical world, especially since human dissection would be outlawed shortly after their work was completed. It wouldn't be until 1800 years later that performing human dissections would be a medically acceptable practice again. But like, you know,
I mean, when you have these guys being the people setting up your reputation, that sucks, man. You can't find anything else because they're just being freaks, cutting people open in the middle of the square.
on dead people, their work was stored in the renowned Library of Alexandria, but they were lost in the Great Fire a
They
few
burned
hundred
it
years
down.
later.
That sucks.
Project 4.1 was actually a side project proposed immediately after the deployment of Castle Bravo, a
What is
high-yield
Castle Bravo?
thermonuclear bomb that was dropped in 1954 by the United States. Bravo was part of Operation Castle, a series of other high-yield nuclear tests with the goal of establishing superiority over the Soviet Union.
They did
the
that.
Marshall Islands, a remote Pacific group of islands, served as ground zero.
I think I know these islands from Pokemon Go. Isn't this the straight line that you can walk on in Pokemon Go? I
for
swear
the
that's a
detonation
thing.
of the nuclear weapons. Castle
Bruh.
Bravo was the strongest detonation and surprisingly produced 2.5 times the
That's
expected
huge!
explosive
Look how big that is, bro!
yield, resulting
I would
in
be
an
so
explosive
scared.
force equivalent to 15
What?
megatons of TNT.
That's
To put that
a
into
lot.
perspective, that is 1,000 times the explosive force of the nuclear bomb dropped on Hiroshima, Japan.
What? It's worse than what we already used before?
And
Bro.
in the final
Bro.
days of World War II. Like, goddamn.
That's
to make
too
matters
much.
worse,
Do we
the
really
Marshall
need that
Islands
much?
were occupied with citizens. So U.S. officials were kind of like, sir, shouldn't we get those people out of the...
No.
Bless you. Thanks, sir. Allergies have been bothering me all day. Must be the radiation, right?
Yeah, it must be the radiation.
No, but seriously, are we gonna get those people out of the radiation zone?
No.
Yeah, you know, that was on my to-do list. Well, too late now, so let's just see how things turn out. Operation Castle was
gonna
quickly
die.
amended with the addition of Project 4.1. This new section aimed to study the human response to significant
God.
radiation exposure.
They left them to study them? To see what happens?
As if tens of thousands of victims in Hiroshima and Nagasaki weren't evidence enough.
What?
Commander of the U.S. Naval Medical Corps, Eugene Cronkite, was in charge of the project and swore everyone involved to absolute secrecy because he thought the public wouldn't be too keen on the whole test nuclear radiation on
it's
non-consenting
kinda messed
people
up,
thing.
bro.
Overall, 239 Marshallese residents were exposed to significant levels of radiation and began showing signs of radiation poisoning a few days later. Symptoms included loss of hair and significant skin damage with weeping wounds, although the
So
wounds did
messed
heal
up.
rather quickly. Immediate observations ceased after 75 days with the conclusion that no long-term effects were likely. But just out of
I do not
curiosity,
believe that.
regular checkups were performed on the residents for years after.
Isn't it like if you get exposed to radiation, it messes up your kids too? Like even if you don't have them yet, like in the future, when you have a kid, they can like have things wrong with them because of the radiation. I swear that's a thing. Like they ruin these people's lives.
Women saw increases in miscarriages and stillbirths.
Yeah!
And newborns that survived experienced developmental difficulties,
Exactly!
impaired growth, and a
That's what I'm
disproportionate
saying!
development of thyroid cancer.
Bruh.
In addition, about 1/3 of those exposed had developed significant tumors by 1974,
Bruh, that's
20
so
years
bad.
after Operation Castle commenced. In the following years, Marshallese representatives spoke out against the United States with accusations that the scope of the experiment was premeditated and intentional.
Yeah.
To which U.S. officials
They didn't
responded,
care.
"Nuh-uh."
No way, bro. Bro.
During the early
That's
years of the
messed up.
Soviet
They just
Union,
don't care.
it wouldn't be uncommon for political opponents to quickly fall ill with a strong case of the death at the hands of poison. In fact, it was quite an effective
That
and
did
discreet
happen
way
a
to
lot.
silence any and all opposition without
Yeah.
causing too much of a stir. Well, besides the
There
public
were a
reacting
lot.
to
Weren't there like a ton of politicians in history that were poisoned? Or like just government people in
mysterious
general?
deaths. And that is why we must rise up against Oh, look at that. They got another one. So how were the Soviets so good
You
at
just go
developing
to
successful
a
poison?
rally, they just die so often you're not even surprised anymore. It's just so normal.
Well, you've got to run preliminary trials on living subjects, of course. So in 1921, a year before the Soviet Union officially formed, the Kamera was established.
The Kamera.
This was the Soviet Secret Service's poison laboratory.
They have a whole lab to develop the
Here,
poison?
new
Bro,
deadly poisons
it's
were developed and
serious.
tested on human subjects.
What?
Those tested were prisoners from the gulags,
course, they
various labor
always take
camps
the
built around the
prisoners.
country for anyone who even had a fleeting thought that wasn't approved by the Soviet Union.
Bruh.
Carry on. The ultimate goal of the Kamera was to devise a poison that was not only lethal,
Mega
but
ultra awesome
undetectable.
poison.
It would be colorless, tasteless, odorless, and untraceable in an autopsy.
Findless.
Prisoners would be unknowingly administered various
Oh my
test
God.
poisons, which were disguised as medication. For me, if it isn't an orange Flintstone vitamin,
Yeah.
I don't trust it.
Yeah, I need my medicine brightly colored or I'm not taking it. All my medicine I take is either like red or orange. It needs to be flavored orange or strawberry or berry or something yummy, and then I'll take it. But I will not take anything that is suspicious or injected anywhere, especially if it's injected in my butt. I don't want it!
The various poisons tested included ricin, which causes severe internal distress and suffering, cyanide, which can cause violent seizures and heart attacks, and curare, a potent muscle relaxant that makes you painfully choke to death. In the end, the tests were pretty successful. For the
killing
Soviet Union,
people?
not for the prisoners. Research led to innovative ways to discreetly dispatch a target, from deploying a cyanide mist to making an assassination look like a heart attack.
What? That's crazy!
But the blue ribbon winner was the concoction known as C2, carbolamine choline chloride, which was basically liquid depression. Exposure to this sucker sparked a very curious reaction. Instead of a violent telltale "I've been poisoned" type death, the victim would simply become weak with a rapid decline in health, all while maintaining a calm and silent demeanor. Death occurred within 15 minutes. Since the dissolution of the Soviet Union in 1991, Russian officials have claimed that the Kamera has been disestablished and abandoned.
I don't believe that.
Sure.
Yeah, literally. Why would they get rid of this program? They put so much money into it to get all these fancy smancy poisons. They're still making them. I know they're making them. And they're probably making them flavored now, too. They're probably strawberry flavored. And I'm going to fall for it one day, and I'm not going to know. I'm not gonna know, and they're gonna get me!
Now, you may have heard about the Tuskegee syphilis study, which was an unethical medical study funded by the United States Public Health Service
It's always the United States,
which involved the study of nearly 400 African-American men who had naturally contracted syphilis. The goal was to observe the effects of the disease when left untreated in African-American males. Even though penicillin, an antibiotic cure for syphilis, eventually became widely available to the public, the afflicted men were intentionally never cured. Fucked up, right? Well, the US decided to outdo themselves with the Guatemalan syphilis experiment. In 1946 to 1948, more than 5,500 Guatemalan natives, including children, were involved in the experiment against their will, with the Guatemalan government granting access to the unwilling patients in hospitals, mental institutions, and even orphanages. Around
Not the little mouse!
1,500 relatively healthy individuals ages 10 to 72 were intentionally infected with syphilis and even gonorrhea. Transmission was either done by direct bacterial contact into wounds or by sexual transmission with infected native sex workers, which were funded by the US government.
Of course they're paying the workers to go do their deed to infect the people. Imagine getting paid by the US government to be a super spreader.
The latter of which proved to be a very effective method of infection. The guy in charge of these experiments was Dr. John C. Cutler.
He looks evil. He just looks evil. He looks like he was born to be evil.
Dr. Dickass.
Yeah,
He often failed to keep accurate medical records of his experiments and instead would only provide anecdotal evidence in his findings. Probably because he knew what he was doing was unethical.
Yeah,
which very
it's
much
messed
sounds
up.
like something only a dickass would do.
Yeah,
But all joking
literally.
aside, the experiments conducted on these people were gruesome. Perhaps one of the most notable documented examples of what these people experienced was about a female patient named Berta. The following is an excerpt from that document.
I'm so
Berta
scared.
was a female patient in the psychiatric hospital. In February 1948, Berta was injected in her left arm with syphilis. A month later, she developed scabies. Several weeks later, Dr. Cutler noted that she had also developed red bumps where he had injected her arm, lesions on her arms and legs, and her skin was beginning to waste away from her body.
Super bad!
Berta was not treated for syphilis until 3 months after her injection.
So they didn't care about
after,
her.
On August 23rd, Dr. Cutler wrote that Berta appeared as if she was going to die, but he did not specify why. That same day, he put gonorrheal pus from another male subject into both of Berta's eyes, as well as her private areas.
Why?
He also reinfected her with syphilis.
Ew!
Several days later, Berta's eyes were filled with pus from the gonorrhea.
Ew!
And she was bleeding from her private area. 3 days later, on August 27th,
This is just inhumane, bro.
Told you he was a dick ass.
Literally,
The
why would you
overall
do
goal of the
that?
study was to determine the effectiveness of penicillin in preventing the STDs. Dr. Cutler had allegedly finalized his reports in 1955, but no evidence was ever found proving that the reports were submitted for peer review or even published.
It was all for nothing.
So, out of
he
all
just
of that
tortured these
suffering,
people for
nothing
nothing.
of medical value was produced.
Bro.
Though I will say, in some glimmer of fairness, a treatment program was established by the United States and made available to the affected Guatemalan population. But only
Okay.
half were reported to actually have received treatments with a questionable quality of care. United States President Barack Obama formally apologized to the Guatemalan government in 2010, 62 years
Oh
after
my
the study
God.
was performed.
Obama, I think it's a little too late, bro. I think it's a little too late. I don't think they're gonna take our apology anymore. 60 years later. Oh, that's so bad.
Yeah, that last one was quite the doozy, huh? Well,
Yeah.
buckle up because it's about to get way worse.
Don't say that.
See
Don't
this right
say
here?
that.
This is Unit 731. It was home to some of the most notorious and truly evil war crimes committed by the Japanese in World War II, which are definitely up there with some of the worst in the history of mankind. Unit
Not
731
good.
served as a lethal human experimentation and biological weapons laboratory during the Second Sino-Japanese War between China and Japan, which ran concurrent to most of the events of World War II. This nightmare facility was established in 1935 in the sub-provincial Chinese city of Harbin, 4 years after
Harbin.
Japanese forces invaded the Chinese region of Manchuria. Inside, hundreds of
so they
thousands of
own that.
Chinese and even some Russian prisoners of war were subjected to some of the most egregious and horrifying human
This is so scary.
experimentations
I
known
would
to
not want
man.
to be down here.
Experiments performed on men, women, and children, which is
Of course. Everyone.
those chosen for
Everyone.
experimentation were dehumanized and referred to as maruta, or logs, rather than
Bruh.
as people, because the
Like a-
cover-up
like a
story
tree
for Unit
log?
731 was that it was a lumber mill. It should be
Oh my
noted that
God.
the vast
They're role playing that the people are logs because they're
majority of the experiments in the facility were carried out to fulfill morbid curiosity, with those
Oh my
performing or
God.
overseeing the studies described as merely playing.
What?
Testimony from a Japanese professor
so
who
messed
witnessed the
up.
studies was quoted saying that some of the experiments had nothing to do with advancing the capability of germ warfare or of
They were just
medicine.
there
is such a
hurting
thing as
people for no
professional
reason.
curiosity. What would happen if we did such and such? What medical purpose was served by
No.
performing and studying beheadings? None at all.
And you
That was
shouldn't
just
do
playing
it.
around.
You should not play around by beheading
people
people.
too. Like
What
to
are we
play.
doing?
So basically, experiments were like,
Bruh.
I wonder what would happen if we just hucked a grenade at a guy. Bam.
I wonder.
Look,
He's gonna die.
he exploded.
Who
Wait,
would
can
have
I go?
guessed?
Gee, I wonder if this large, heavy object will crush this guy.
I wonder.
Yup.
This is so stupid, bro. Why are
Will
you doing
this guy
these?
freeze to death if I freeze him to death?
Yeah.
Wow, who would have guessed?
Literally, who would
lot
have
of these
guessed?
experiments were designed to test the absolute limits of the human body. Tests included depriving victims of food or water to see how long they could survive.
I wonder what's gonna happen. They're gonna die.
Placing victims in low-pressure chambers until their eyes popped
They're gonna
from
die.
their skulls, injecting victims with animal blood,
They're gonna get diseases and die. It's all gonna be they're gonna die.
turning victims upside down until death, or even
Oh my
draining
God.
victims of
Oh
blood
my
just to study
God.
blood loss limits. Some victims were even dehydrated in front of large hot fans to the point of mummification.
What?
At the time of death, they only weighed 20% of their initial body weight.
They cooked them in an air fryer. That's literally cooking them in an
Perhaps
air
one of
fryer.
the worst examples I've read was the forced pregnancy of
so
female
messed up.
victims. The mothers were injected with various diseases and drugs just to see how they affected the unborn child. Sometimes
Bruh.
performing a vivisection, cutting the fetus out of the mother for examination.
Ew.
There's honestly so many more gruesome experiments that I just can't get into here. So if you
Please
are curious,
don't.
I would encourage you to look them up. But it's like legit really bad, so You've been warned. By the end of the war, as Soviet forces were closing in, Japanese officials had all remaining prisoners executed, and the entirety of Unit 731 hastily demolished to destroy any remaining evidence of the program's existence.
Bruh.
The United States had discovered trace evidence and pressured Japanese officials into spilling the beans, under threat that they would be handed over to Soviet officials for trial and punishment if they did not cooperate. Once the US learned the full extent of the horrors of Unit 731, all of those involved were swiftly brought to trial and executed for their crimes.
Good!
Except, no.
What?
They actually weren't. In reality, the United States claimed that the data collected from the inhumane atrocities was actually pretty valuable.
Of course. The people that did the terrible things would like the other people doing the terrible
Since
things.
it is otherwise ethically unobtainable through conventional means. As such, many of those involved were granted immunity and freedom in exchange for the data. The deal was struck, and the United States kept everything under lock and key. The Soviet Union, however, pursued trials against the top military leaders and scientists from Unit 731. In the end, only 12 individuals were tried and sentenced to several years in labor camps, although the United States repeatedly denied that Unit 731 ever existed.
But
that was a bummer. Here's something to cheer you up. I'll see you over there.
Bruh.